on the drive home, I realized that it wasn't the evidence. The evidence isn't what was holding me back, because the evidence was strong. It was the fact that I didn't want it to be true. And when I realized that, that's when I threw my hands up and I said, all right, Jesus, what's next?
Hey guys, I'm Bill Westers, and this is the Encountering Truth podcast. Welcome to the Encountering Truth podcast, where we examine the evidence for Christianity, engage culture with kindness and conviction, and encounter Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. Well, my guest today is someone that I met at the Cross-Examine Instructors Academy this summer. His name is Michael Ray Lewis, and we were having lunch one day, and he was just telling me his story. It's just an incredible story about how he went from basically being a pretty staunch atheist to examining the evidence for Christianity and encountering Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. And he's got a great story. And what's really cool is that Michael is actually a filmmaker, and he's going to take he's in process on the project to make a documentary film about that very evidence that he examined that led him to Christ. And so we're going to talk about that video later on and even look at a preview of it. But first, I want to just go ahead and welcome my guest on. Welcome, Michael Ray Lewis. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Yeah. Well, it's great to have you. And, you know, like I said, your story just was such a powerful story that I would love for you to be able to share that with our audience. And then, you know, in the intro, I said that you were basically a staunch atheist. Would that be a pretty good description of where you were? And maybe start there. Tell us about your story and what led to you to change.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I was a staunch atheist. I grew up in a home that it wasn't a Christian home. Everyone in my home would say that we believed in God and had a Bible under our bed, but we never touched the Bible, never talked about God, and Jesus specifically was never even brought up in my home. So naturally, as I get older, the only real interaction I had with Christians were the ones that were on the street corners with the megaphones and the giant signs yelling at me that I'm going to hell. Mm-hmm. And so obviously I didn't have a good interaction with them right off the bat. Right. But over time, I really just came to think that it was ridiculous. There was no good reason to believe it. I would watch documentaries by Bill Maher or a documentary called Zeitgeist. And these were films that were basically hammering Christianity, just showing how there's no good reason to believe it. And they would go around and interview people who couldn't answer the hard questions that they had. Whenever I had conversations with some Christians, they would dismiss me more than anything. And so I grew up just naturally becoming an atheist and pretty much hating Christians. I didn't want anything to do with Christianity. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward a little bit and I get married. And my wife, it was about a year into our marriage, and she came home one day and she said, I feel like Jesus is calling me back. And I was already kind of frustrated at that point because I had actually broken up with a girlfriend prior to getting with my wife because she tried to drag me to church. Oh, wow. But now here my wife is inviting me to a church and trying to get me to go and telling me that Jesus is calling her back. And I loved her. So I said, okay, I'll go to church with you and I'll see what all this is about. And I remember I walked in the doors and I'm looking around at the congregation and I can see these people. And I'm like, you know what? This is not as bad as I thought. It gives people something to hope in, but it's just not true. Like, it's nice for them to believe in something, but it's just, right. It's not true. There's no good reason to believe it. Well, eventually I got tired of going. I didn't want to go anymore. And so I figured all I had to do was show my wife that it wasn't true. If I could show her that it wasn't true, then she would stop going and we could get out of this nonsense, right? Well, she was very persistent. I would hit her with really difficult questions. And as much as she couldn't answer the questions, it didn't waver her at all. she was adamant that it was true. So I was doing this for about 3 years. It took me about 3 years of just hammering her with questions and starting to take a second look at it. I remember a video by Hugh Ross popped up on my YouTube feed, and it was a video of him going over his perspective of the creation days. And I think that was the first video I watched that somewhat piqued my interest and made me second guess maybe there is something to all of this. And it took about 3 years of me just investigating and looking into it. And in the midst of trying to prove her wrong, at the end, it turns out that she had every good reason to believe it. There was so much evidence to support not only the evidence for the existence of God, but the evidence for Jesus being who he claimed to be. And I remember I had the last bit of questions on a piece of paper. And my wife, I'm hammering her with these. These are questions about things in Scripture. And she said, you know what, I can't answer, but I'm going to send you to a guy who can. And she sent me to a family friend. And I went to his house and had all of these questions laid out. And I was ready to just hammer him with it. And I remember at the end of the conversation, he had used every question that I had asked. He had used Scripture to answer it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I got to the end of my list of questions, and he looked at me and he said, so do you believe it? And I had no more objections at that point. I was kind of stumped. And I said, I think so. But I wasn't sure. And I remember it was the drive home that night, right after I left him. On the drive home, I realized that it wasn't the evidence. The evidence isn't what was holding me back, because the evidence was strong.
Sure.
It was the fact that I didn't want it to be true.
Okay.
And when I realized that, that's when I threw my hands up and I said, all right, Jesus, what's next? And ended up giving my life to Christ.
Wow.
So it was a very, very slow process, because I was very resistant. I was in it to prove it wrong, and ended up proving it right.
Yeah, I love stories like that, though. It's so, you know, sometimes as a Christian, when you're sharing your faith and talking to people, you just come across people that just seem hostile, or like, man, how is this guy ever going to change? But then we meet people like you that completely doubted and were atheist and were in a sense hostile, but yet, but God, right? People say, but God. And it's just amazing what God can do, even with the hardest heart. And what were some of those questions that you had? I mean, and I know, I think a lot of times when we get so stuck on what we've always done and believed and thought for so long, it can be really hard to, let go, and until we realize, like you said, that it's not the evidence, it comes down to more of an emotional doubt, or some other reason, like, I don't want it to be true. What were some of the questions that you had, and how did he answer those?
Well, the most basic evidential based questions I had were questions about evolution, questions about Genesis in general, questions about the crazy things that happened in Scripture, that just the miraculous events like Noah and all the crazy stuff you hear, and the existence of Jesus even being a historical figure was one objection that I had. But outside of the evidence-based questions I had, the more fundamental question or objection I had towards Christianity was the fact that he was going to send me to hell because I had trouble believing in him. I even told my wife this. I said, I can't believe in a God who's going to send me to an eternal punishment just because I have a bit of trouble believing in him. And that was my view.
Yeah.
But it was mostly because I didn't grasp the gospel. I didn't grasp the fact that we were already broken from, separated from God. I didn't grasp the fact that what he had done to bring us into a right relationship with him, and he's standing right there in front of you with his hands open, waiting for you to receive him. I didn't grasp all of that. All I saw was this hateful God who would send me to hell because I had trouble believing in him. And I think that is probably one of the main objections I hear when I have conversations with non-believers, because they've heard slogans like Jesus has died for your sins, Jesus is the only way, they've heard all of these statements so many times before that it's just like noise to them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't fully grasp the gravity of what the gospel is, what the good news is. And so I've made it one of the missions I've made in having conversations with people is to um, or explain to them the gospel in a different way, using different language, verse, instead of repent and believe and all of these slogans that they've heard these all of their life, and it hasn't really sunk in. In fact, for most self-professed Christians, it hasn't sunk in either.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I one of the greatest conversation starters I have when I'm having a conversation with non-believers is cross necklaces. I always go for the cross necklace because I'll go straight to it and I'll say, well, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
And I'll ask them about Jesus. I'll ask them to explain to me the gospel. I'll ask them to define it for me. Tell me why does Jesus have to be the only way? And I'll ask the Christian these difficult questions to kind of spark that, the fact that not only do we need to understand the gospel and the gravity of it, but we need to be able to explain it to others.
Yeah.
And if we're not doing that well, then we're not doing our job as Frank says, ambassadors for Christ.
Yeah, that's good. What is the language that you use? Because I think of it as, people have this idea of, oh, God's going to send me to hell. I like what you said, that um, that Christ is, or that we're already sending ourselves to hell.
Right.
And I like to look at it as Jesus as the one with the rescue plan. He's the rescue out of what we're doing to ourselves. And I think they don't recognize that side of it. But what are some of that language that you use to get through the noise of everything they've already heard?
I'll use language. What I'll do first is I'll define what God is, because it's not as though God is some guy in the clouds, right?
Right.
I define this as a being that is eternal in every aspect that he can be eternal. And so when we talk about goodness or what is good, it's by definition the nature of God. And if things are good by definition of the nature of God, well, that means any deviation from good would be a deviation from God, right? And so what I'll do is I'll tell them, in your life, we look around at the brokenness of the world and we see that there's evil everywhere. And we also know that there's something in us that's missing. There's something in us that we can't seem to fill. It's this void that no matter what we do in life, we tend to try to fill it with different pursuits or hobbies. Right. But no matter what we do, we always have this hole that we can't seem to fill. Well, what I'll explain is that void that you fill is the separation from God. Mm-hmm. And if we're separated from God now, you can think of him as being a hot fire or a flame, and us being the shadow trying to be in the presence of the flame. It's impossible, right? Mm-hmm. There's something that's separated us from God, and that is sin. That is the deviation of his goodness. And so that's the bad news. But the good news is that God's provided a way for us to come in the presence of him. And that's through his son, Jesus. That's what he did on the cross, by covering us by his blood, by putting us in a position where we can be in a right relationship with him. And so in that sense, the path is narrow, because Jesus is the only one who's solved the problem and provided us that option. But it's also wide open. He's sitting there waiting for you to receive him. And so it's not this mindset that he's sending us somewhere for an eternal punishment because he's some hateful God. It's the fact, like you said, we're already sending ourselves there, and he's provided a path to himself, and we can either take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And you see how that's different than just repent and believe. It's more of a defining and explaining this separation that we have from God. And I think that helps a lot when we just kind of break it down and try to not use fancy language, but try to just break it down and explain in the simplest form what's the problem and what's the solution.
Right. Yeah. I like what you were saying there. Basically kind of summing up, it's like, yes, Christianity is exclusive because Jesus is the only way. Yet on the other hand, it's the most inclusive religion out there because it's open to literally anyone who's willing to accept it.
Right.
But accepting it requires bowing the knee to the one
That's
and only.
exactly right.
Yeah, that's
And that's
good.
one of the things that I'll ask people when it kind of comes down to it, and I've gone through all the evidence and they're still resistant. One of the things that I'll ask them is, what are you afraid of losing
Mm,
if you give your life to Jesus? What is it that you can't seem to let go of? And some people will say, well, I don't know. And I'll define it for them. Like, well, what you're afraid of losing is yourself,
mm,
because you're no longer going to be you never were in control of your life, but you're no longer going to think you're in control of your life.
yeah,
You're going to be giving your life completely to um, the one who can. Um, you're going to be completely giving your life to Christ,
right.
and in doing that, you're gonna completely lose yourself as well. And far from that being a bad thing, it turns out to be the greatest thing you could ever do.
Mm, yeah, amen. That's good. Do you come across people that uh, are kind of like how you were when you were an atheist? Do you get some
Mm-hmm.
pushback and some like, oh, don't impose your beliefs, or Christians just need to keep their religion to themselves, or and then what do you do with that?
You know, I so ever since I became a believer, I was so absolutely convinced. And once I realized that all this stuff is actually true,
Hmm.
like this stuff that Jesus claimed was a historical events that actually happened. When I realized that, this fire was burning in me, like, well, why don't people know this?
Right.
I need to tell people about this. And so I've made it a mission of mine to have these conversations with people, even though I never was a people person. I'm not good at having conversations with people. But it turns out that if you prepare yourself, God's going to put people in your path. And 80% of the people that I run into are at least willing to have a conversation with me. And 80% of them have also not really thought hard about their belief systems,
Right.
about what it is that they actually believe about reality.
Does it actually
Um,
work together? Is it consistent as a worldview?
exactly. What they've done is they've taken slogans or Google searches or things that they prefer and built a worldview off of this without ever digging deeper. So it's more a worldview based on preferences. And so when you start questioning them about their worldview, um, it's really, you'll quickly notice that they haven't thought deeply about these topics.
Mm-hmm.
And they're open to hearing what you have to say. I have some great conversations with people. Now, I do base a lot of my apologetic approaches based off of Greg Kokel's book Tactics. So my goal is to plant a pebble in this shoe, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. And so I try to figure out what their worldview is so that I can understand where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And then I question them into their objections to Christianity, whether it be they were hurt by the church, is it even an evidence based objection? And then I try to leave them with something based on that objection. It's honestly not very often that I run into a staunch atheist like I was.
Okay.
More often than not, like I said, 80% of the people, I mean, I have some great conversations with people.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, but there are people, more so than that, are the people who are just resistant. They just don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
They'll avoid the topic or they'll try to
Sure.
change the subject. Um, but every once in a while, I do still run into the very aggressive atheist, and the only thing we can do is if they're willing to have conversations, you go for it, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But if you feel that you're not getting anywhere with them, the only thing we can do is just take a step back, pray, leave them with something like your phone number, so that you will
Sure.
be that person that when God does something in their heart
Yeah.
and they have questions, you'll be that person that they can come back to, and then just continue to pray for them.
Yeah. That's good. What do you do when you have people that have questions that maybe you don't know the answer to, or like when you were going through that, did you find that as a turnoff, or was it like you said with your wife? She was still pretty solid in her faith. Was that something that stood out to you as a positive or as a negative?
Looking back now, definitely a positive, because she was able to, even though I hit her with these difficult questions, she was able to just be like, I don't know the answer to that. And she would, I remember she even offered like me getting books and reading on it, reading on the topics. One of the first books I bought was Timothy Keller's Reason for God, and read through that, and a bunch of apologetic books that I was running into. But I think that's the way we need to approach it. If we don't know the answer to a question, we need to be honest and say we don't know. But it should be our goal to try to figure out the answer to the question that we don't know. Don't ever try to answer it because then it's going to look bad. Most of the time when I had conversations with Christians as an atheist, they would get defensive and they would try to throw forth an answer even though they hadn't looked into the topic. And I think that's the worst thing we can do, because then we start becoming defensive in the way that's like this aggressiveness, and non-believers see right through that.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about just being honest, like you said, and saying, "Look, I don't know, but I can look into that and get back to you," and then you kind of maintain that relationship with a phone number, like what you were saying, and just be there for them, and maybe be able to get back in touch, or next time you see each other, like, "Hey, look, I looked into that question that you have, and here's what I came up with," or maybe it's still not the best answer or a satisfactory answer, but at least you're showing interest in that person's life, that they can see that you're a real person and not just some combative type of individual that just turns them off even more, right?
Exactly. In fact, what's interesting about that is it's the greatest thing, the hardest thing when you're trying to evangelize and have conversations with people. I think most Christians are so afraid that they're going to get asked a question that they don't know the answer to that they avoid the conversations altogether. But what's crazy is if you just jump into the conversation, even though you don't know all the answers, maybe you haven't studied apologetics, or you have this friend at work that you just want to have a conversation with, you don't even know what their objections are. If you'll just throw yourself into the conversation, be honest with them about the things you don't know, be a student of their worldview, and let them ask the hard questions, I guarantee you when they ask you a question that you don't know, it's going to create this fire in you that will make you want to know the answer to the question. And then you'll go figure it out, get back with them. But now you have that in your pocket that the next time that question comes up, you're prepared.
That's true. Yeah. And at the very least, you can even help someone just by having those conversations, causes people to start to think about their own worldview. That, like, a lot of, like what you were saying earlier, a lot of people haven't even like thought about what they believe. And if we can at least get them thinking about that, maybe sometimes they would realize, hey, you know what, this is inconsistent. I have a mind, but yet I believe the only thing that's real is the physical things. Like, how does that add up? Or, as just an example. But let's move on, because this has been a good conversation. But there's one thing that I want to touch on before we start talking about your movie. And that's something that you said at Cross-Examine Instructor Academy. That really struck me as such a powerful statement that it just drew me in. You said to someone, I don't even remember the exact scenario that we were talking, but you said something on the lines of like, now I've told you my story, but I haven't told you what drives me. Can you tell us, Michael, what drives you?
So shortly after I became a believer, I was, like I said, I was on fire. I wanted to share Jesus with the world, but I was afraid. Just like most Christians today, like I said, we're afraid. As sad as it sounds, we're afraid for the conversation to get awkward. We're afraid that we're going to be uncomfortable in a situation by talking to people. It's not persecution that we're really afraid of. What we're afraid of is just the awkward conversations.
Sure.
Now, my dad had called me one day, and he said that my grandmother was passing away in the hospital. She had been sick for a while, and they had her on life support, but they were going to pull the plug and let her go. So I went to the hospital, and I remember it was my dad and my aunts, and we were all in the hospital room, and a chaplain came by and asked if he could pray for us, or pray for my grandmother. So we all get in this circle, hold hands, and start citing the Lord's Prayer. Now, keep in mind, like I said before, I'd never heard my family talk about God. I had never heard my family talk about Jesus. This was to me, it felt almost like just reciting something that they had learned when they were younger. And on top of that, I also didn't know where my grandmother stood on believing in Jesus. And I had a unique opportunity before they let her go to have a conversation with her and share the gospel and share Jesus with her. But I chose not to because I was afraid of what my family might think. I was afraid of that conversation. And I was in the hospital room when they pulled the plug, and the last thing my grandmother said was, "Help me."
Oh, wow.
And that impacted me so greatly. I was in tears days after that because I had that opportunity and I didn't take it. And I didn't take it for the worst reason possible, because I didn't want it to be awkward and have that conversation with her in front of my family. And ever since that day, I made a dedication, and I said, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to seize every opportunity I have to talk to people about Jesus. It doesn't matter the situation. It doesn't matter how awkward I feel. I'm dedicated to it. I'm going to share the gospel regardless. And so what I do now is my evangelism isn't like a door-to-door evangelism. My evangelism is every single person that I come into contact with. So whether it be a person on the plane ride, whether it be a person changing the oil on my car, whether it be a person in the store, the guy coming to sell solar panels to me at the front door, the Jehovah's Witnesses coming to the door, every conversation I have, I will bring up God within 5 minutes. And I do it very bluntly now. I will literally just flat out ask them, "Hey, can I ask you a personal question? What do you believe about God? What do you believe about Jesus?" And I'll jump straight into it. And I think it's hard for us to do that sometimes, but it's necessary. I think because if we love Jesus and we really believe that all of this that he claimed about reality is true, why are we not out there talking about him? And the worst case is, why are we not out there talking about him? Because we're afraid of a little awkwardness. Right. It just shouldn't be the case. And so that's what drives me. I try to look for opportunities every chance that I get to have a conversation. And I like I said, I think if you equip yourself, God's going to put people in your path, because I talk to people all the time now and have great conversations about Jesus.
That's awesome. I mean, if that does not inspire you and give you boldness and convict you a little bit, wow, geez, I know I've been, a victim of that, like just afraid to step out, and that's that awkwardness, but to be in that position and just look back and think, man, I had an opportunity. And the thing is that, like you said, this is true. If we really believe this is true, it's not that we're trying to impose something on somebody. We're trying to offer a cure. It's not just talking about our favorite type of dessert. We're trying to offer a cure that this is where we've talked on here before about objective truth claims. It's not just about a subjective idea. It's just not just about opinion, but we've come to a conclusion that Christianity is the best explanation for the way things are, and to not share that and the good news of that, man, that's just an inspiring story. Now, do you still have some of the awkward feelings and have to like kind of push past that with people?
Every single time. Every time you get these like weird nervous feelings in your stomach, and you're like, I really don't want to do it. Like, what are they going to say? And sometimes I'm just not even in the mood. But what I found is that when you start feeling that tension and that nervousness, all you got to do is ask the first question. Just ask the question, "What do you believe about God?" Or just start it out with, "Can I ask you a personal question?" And the minute that you ask that first question, I don't want to say it goes away, but every question after that just becomes easier. The conversation starts to just grow, and you'll be so surprised at how many people inwardly so badly want to talk about God, because people don't like, the two topics to avoid are politics and religion, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
people the only conversations most people have are about the weather or sports teams.
Mm.
When it's as if we've stopped having conversations about the big questions. What is our purpose? Why are we
Yeah.
here? Where did we come from? Like, I think inwardly we all want to know, we all desire to know the answers to those questions, and people will open up to you. It's crazy how much, just by asking them simple questions, and just like I said, just start it out. Get something in your pocket that you can say that will start the conversation. Like I said, mine is, can I ask you a personal question?
Right. Yeah.
Just think of something that, and then you already know that first question, and then just let the conversation go from there.
Yeah. That's good. Well, man, this has been really good. But I really want to get to talking about your film. So let's get into that, and then yeah, and kind of go from there. But first of all, it's called Universe Designed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then so tell us a little bit about it. Just what caused you, what brought you to decide to make the film? Um, Give us a little bit of your background in the film industry, and go on from there.
So I grew up watching nothing but horror films. I loved horror films. So much so that I wanted to make horror films. So I ended up buying a camera. I did a few short films. I gradually started doing more. I ended up getting hired for a couple of feature films, and everything about my world was horror. I was obsessed with it.
Wow.
And then I gave my life to Jesus, and I had already had a script and a story prepared for a horror film I was going to do. Ended up giving my life to Jesus, and I just felt this conviction, like there's no good reason for me to do this.
Wow.
I even tried to think of some way to make it into a Christian horror film in my mind, and I couldn't do it. I felt like I needed to do something different, and my wife was talking to me, and or we were having conversations, and I was like, well, I can't do a Christian film because Christian films suck. And
Yeah.
she said, well, why don't you do a documentary on the evidence that you found? And so originally I was just going to try to find some atheists that gave their life to Christ and get some testimonies and put that together. But I also sent emails to all of the people that I read books on during that 3 years.
Okay.
So Frank Turek, Hugh Ross,
Yeah.
Greg Kokel, Stephen Meyer, all of these guys. I just sent out an email and said, hey, I'm doing a documentary and I'm wondering if they'll be willing to be interviewed for it. Virtually every single one of them responded and said yes. And so I started booking plane tickets on credit cards, and
Nice.
I created a website with like a donation base so people could donate and fund the project. And I just started going and getting all of these interviews. And I honestly didn't know how the story was going to play out, because it took me 3 years to convince me that this was true.
Mm.
And if I'm going to do a film and try to pack in the evidence for God, that seems like a almost impossible task to try to compact all of that into an hour and 20-minute or 2 hour movie. But what I did is all of those difficult questions that I had as an atheist, I wrote them down on a piece of paper. I went in front of all of these interviews and asked them all those difficult questions.
Nice.
And I got their responses to all the hard questions that I had. And the result of it is a documentary that is providing the evidence for not only the existence of God, but for Jesus being who he claimed to be. So in the documentary, I cover the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the design that we see in life, the problems with evolution. If there is a God out there, how do we know that it's the Christian God versus all the other religions out there? And then I shift gears to, well, that hinges on the fact if Jesus is who he claimed to be. And so I look at the evidence surrounding the resurrection, and then ultimately giving the gospel message in the film. And I've designed it in such a way that you could, if you don't know anything about apologetics and you don't know who these people are, you could be a non-believer watching this and you won't even realize it's a Christian film until you're about 20 minutes into it.
Wow.
And I did that intentionally because I know that if it were myself looking at this film and I knew it was a Christian film, I would dismiss it right away.
Right.
And I don't want people to dismiss it. I want to, my goal with the film is to pique their curiosity, because I know I can't build an entire case in one film. But what I can do is I can get them to rethink about Christianity and pique their curiosity, and then challenge them to go and look at the evidence themselves.
Yeah.
And so my goal is that once you watch the film will direct you to the website. And on the website, I have all of the resources for all of the scholars that I interview, in the hopes that you'll go and start your investigation in the way that I did.
That's good. Yeah. Well, I want to just dive in and let's just watch the trailer here. So we'll see if we can make this work.
The question, why is there something rather than nothing, is something the philosopher Leibniz proposed. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does anything exist?
Where do the building blocks of life come from?
The fundamental constants and parameters and characteristics that have to assume exacting, precise values if life is going to be possible in the universe.
People look around and they say, why are things the way they are? Scientists believe there's an intelligible answer to that, meaning there is a reason for the way things are. What's that reason?
We see design in the universe and design in life. That's the effect. So we reason back to a cause, a designer.
It was astronomy that persuaded me that the Bible was the inspired, inerrant word of the one that created the universe.
I wanted to see if the evidence that I was finding for the resurrection of Jesus would withstand the toughest of critical scrutiny.
No one in the history of anyone has had the impact that Jesus of Nazareth has had in literature, art, music, education, science, and world religions.
Wow. That's just, I don't know. It's just so awesome. It's incredible. It's just to see that, if you are watching or just listening to this on audio, you have got to go and check out the YouTube video, either watch this episode or go straight to Michael's website and watch the videos from there. But it's stunning. It's incredible and beautiful. And did you actually do all the filming for all of that yourself?
Yeah, most of the film is shot by me. I did hire a couple of people who helped run like B cameras and things, but I had to set up the camera and turn the monitor so I could see it while I'm trying to give them the interview. And so I'm trying to concentrate on like 3 things at a time to make sure that I get the full interview, all the questions down, but also making sure I keep things in focus. And then I'm editing it myself as well. I am outsourcing the visual effects. We're doing some 3D effects like the planets and things that you saw in there. And I'm outsourcing the music and all of the mix and master post work. But it's definitely been a challenge to try to condense. I ended up with about 30 hours of interviews that I had to condense down to an hour and 20-minute movie.
Wow.
So it's been a challenge, but we're getting so much closer.
Yeah, it's just, I'm super excited I can't wait for this thing to come out because I'm going to bring everybody to it that I can think of, or to get them to watch it. So I noticed some pretty big names. You mentioned some, Frank Turek, Greg Kokel. Who are some of the other people that you were able to get 30 hours worth of interviews with?
So we've got Frank Turek, Greg Kokel, Hugh Ross, J. Warner Wallace, Elisa Childers, Travis Dickinson, Stephen Meyer, Mike Lacona, Fuzz Rana, and the others I'm drawing a blank on. But you can see the full list of the cast.
Sure, yeah, that alone is quite a big list right there. That's pretty amazing, and a lot of time consuming, a lot of travel, and I'm sure, and you're also funding it yourself, aren't you?
Yes. So the entire project's been donation based. We've raised and spent about 110,000 so far, which sounds like a lot, but when you're making a film of this size, I'm doing it for far, far less than other documentaries that are way higher in budget. We are mostly funded for finishing production. My goal is to raise another $20,000 to $30,000 to finish the post production, and then once I've made the film, I'm going to start just praying for opportunities for connections on distributing the film, because marketing cost is going to be a whole nother beast. Oh, yeah. The marketing funds will probably need to exceed the money that I've actually spent creating the film. Wow. So we're constantly, I keep the donation side up and constantly trying to promote it and raise funds for it. But it's amazing that I've been able to raise what we have so far. It's been gradual, which is great, because it's God's forced me to be patient with it. We've been in production since I started this film. It was about 2.5 years ago. And so we've been, it's been a long process to put this together. We are so close, though. We're so close. My original goal was to finish it by the end of the year. VFX are taking a little bit longer, but my goal is still to have it done either by the end of the year or the beginning of the following year.
Okay. And where do you plan on trying to distribute it to?
My hope is to get it at least a limited theatrical release. Okay. I'm looking for really anyone who has connections through Fathom events or any one of those distribution platforms where I can get the film out there. I've gotten a few small connections that I'm still waiting to hear back from, but the goal is to do an event release. So it'll be a nationwide theatrical release, but maybe for one day. A very limited showing, and then we could promote it and get people to go to the theaters there. And then hopefully if I can get it in theaters, then ultimately following that, we'll do streaming sites. But my goal is to use this more, like I said, as a ministry than just a film. Right. This is meant to be a film that when you're in those conversations with people and you only have enough time to plant a small seed or stone in their shoe, you maybe have 5 minutes with them. But that at the end of the conversation, most people, you ask them if they'll read a book, they're going to say no. But if you ask them if they'll watch a film, they may take the time to do that. And so the goal is to use it as a tool to just share the gospel with them and to share some of the evidences with them, even when you don't have the opportunity to have hour-long conversations.
Sure, yeah. I think I can see like using this and not just say, hey, go watch this film, but like, hey, you got an afternoon, you got a Saturday night that you want to get together and watch this film together, and we can have it, talk about it afterwards if you got some time. It's a lot easier just to sit down and spend time together, making that connection with people, and instead of saying, hey, just go read this book and tell me what you think. Nobody's going to spend that time. I mean, there are people that will spend the time, but it's a lot easier to get people just to say, yeah, I'll watch a couple hours of a video. And if you can sit there with them and you can have that conversation,
exactly,
that can be a pretty powerful ministry tool.
Exactly. And we're visual people. We, especially the younger generation now, we're such visual people. So that was one of the challenges when editing the film, was trying to keep it interesting, because some of this stuff, it gets so technical when we're looking at the evidence that it just goes over some people's heads.
Sure. And
so my goal in creating it was to keep it driven and interesting enough to keep the audience going and listening for more. And then, like I said, ultimately I ended up giving the gospel message at the end of the film. One of the things that I didn't expect when I became a believer was most of these Christian films that come out are more so family safe films. So they're films that have some kind of good message and they're safe for the family to watch, but they don't actually deliver the gospel. And remember when I was talking earlier, I said 80% of the people that I have conversations with, they don't have a grasp on the gospel. They've heard the slogans, but they don't have a grasp on the brokenness that is in us and the separation that we have. And so one of the things I was adamant about with creating this film was making sure that the gospel is in there.
That's awesome. And I'm just super excited. I just want to keep up to date. And look, guys, if you are listening to this, if you're watching this, make sure that you follow Michael, keep checking back to his webpage and go donate to him, because I think this is just going to be such a powerful tool, because you're right. There's a lot of Christian films out there that have a good family safe message, but it's a lot of times for Christians, and they don't share a gospel message because it's like, hey, we want to create this so that it's safe for Christian families to watch with their kids. And there's a place for that. But on the other hand, it's how can we turn that into something outward facing to bring people in and lay out the gospel message for people in a way that's relevant, a way that's powerful, a way that's rational, and just all around visually stunning. So I've really enjoyed this website, I've really enjoyed this interview with you, Michael. I want to ask you one more question before we bring things to a close, and kind of summarizing some things here. If you could go back in time and talk to that younger Michael Ray Lewis, the unbelieving atheist Michael, what would you say to him? Or maybe there's someone listening to this right now that's kind of in that same position. What would you say to that person or that younger version of you that's exploring the possibility or against the possibility of Christianity?
I would probably say that Christianity isn't what you think it is. You're viewing Christianity through the lens of Christians who are fallen short. And if we are to figure out if it's actually true, one, we need to be at least open to taking a look. And we can't assume things right off the bat. I would have told myself to stop taking things at face value and look deeper, and start trying to figure out what is true about reality. Looking at the different worldviews, looking at the different belief systems, and putting every one of those belief systems to the test and see which one holds up. Because if there is one that's true, it's going to stand out pretty obvious that one's going to hold up. Sure. And so I would challenge myself to take a second look at it, give it a chance, and take a second look at it.
That's good. Thank you so much. And tell us one more time, where can we go? First of all, you kind of share with us where you are in the production process. Summarize that for us again. Tell us what more that you need to do to be able to finish, and give us a picture of how much that you're looking for to be able to finish this amazing project of yours, and what can we do to help you with that?
Well, right now, the story is complete. Most of the film is cut and edited. We are about halfway through visual effects. So we still have some 3D elements that are being created. The music is already done. So the final bit of funding now is just to complete those visual effects, to complete the color, and to complete the mix and master of the audio. Once that's finished, then I have to figure out how the distribution process is going to work. I've waited to start reaching out to people until I have a completed product to show people. But once it's finished, then I'm probably going to do another donation campaign to try to raise money for marketing and see where to go from there. But as of right now, I think I can probably finish the film with another 20 to 30,000 is what I'm still looking to raise to finish it. And then marketing cost, I don't have a number on yet because this will be my first film as a director. All of the other films that I've done, I've either been the DP, the camera operator, the editor. So this will be my first film as a director. So I'm still trying to figure out how the distribution process works. Okay. So if anyone has connections or knows how that process is going to go, you can always reach out to me via the website as well. And the website has the website has so much more than just the trailer and a donation page. If you go to the website, like I said, I have the resources for all of the scholars that are in the film. And my goal is to create almost like a central station where people who are trying to sort through all of this information, it's kind of like a location you can go to, and it gives you a ton of the resources that you need.
That's good. And share that website with us one more time.
Just universedesigned.com.
Okay. universedesigned.com. And that's designed with a D on the past tense, right?
That's right.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. I'm overjoyed about this project, and I can't wait to see it. And I can't wait to hear all of the reports and hear the stories that will come, the lives that will be changed as a result of it. So thanks for coming on, Michael.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Make sure that you go to Michael's website, go check him out, support him, reach out to him, do what you can financially, be in prayer for him and for this project. I'm sure he would appreciate all of that. But thanks for listening again, and make sure to share this episode with your friends, subscribe and like the podcast wherever you listen, and make sure to follow us on Facebook and visit our website, encounteringtruth.org. But remember, let's make it our goal to examine the evidence, engage culture, and encounter Jesus. God bless. We'll see you next time.